Hello and welcome to News Desk. I'm Alex Forrest-Whiting.
And I'm Michelle Stockman.
Guilty or not guilty, did Brazil's former president Jair Bolsonaro plot to overthrow Brazil's democracy and hang on to power after he'd lost the 2022 election? So far, 2 out of 5 of Brazil's Supreme Court justices said he did. Just one more justice needs to declare Bolsonaro guilty for him to be convicted.
There was an attempt to abolish the democratic rule of law, an attempted coup, and the existence of a criminal organization.
What is being done outside the country's legal framework is shameful.
This is not tyranny, this is not dictatorship. On the contrary, it's the affirmation of the democracy that Brazil has built upon since the 1988 Constitution, and that is how I vote.
I am an innocent person. What they are doing to the former president of the republic is cowardly. We are going to face everyone. What matters to me is the law of God.
So Jair Bolsonaro ending that then. And as we look at Bolsonaro's day of judgment, we are asking this question: Trump's Brazilian ally, jail or power?
Yes, and what is next for Bolsonaro and for Brazil's future? We've already had some of your comments in the community post, and let me get to those right here. I've got them printed out, actually, and I'm going to go through 3 of them. The first one, trying to channel why Trump has thrown his support behind Bolsonaro. This is from Atticus the Gaming Llama, love the name. What happened to Bolsonaro keeps Trump up at night because it's what he managed to dodge after January 6th, which is why it's so important he punishes Brazil for actively defending their democracy. And then this other comment is kind of taking a look at the push to support Bolsonaro by his sons. And it says, when you're asking for foreign interference in your court process or elections, referring to his son Eduardo going to the U.S., asking for U.S. support for Bolsonaro, you're on the wrong side of history. And then finally, this is from it looks like a Bolsonaro supporter, Benjamin Rankman, who says, it is an echo of the outrageous persecutions faced by Trump. If they persist in such behaviors, I would not be surprised if Brazilians engaged in direct action against their internal enemies. Sad that we have come to this. The Western world, Europe is a prime example, is filled with institutions and politicians willing to subvert the will of the people in the name of democracy. And I think that really gets to the heart of it, Alex, that this is a big debate, a big verdict on what democracy means for Brazil.
Absolutely. And hopefully to help us with those questions a little bit later, certainly, we have got Albert Steinberger, who is with us very kindly in the studio from DW's Brazil department. So it's great that you are actually Brazilian and sitting with us. So we have got knowledge in the room. We heard there some of those comments, and we do want to talk about things like democracy, but I just want to hit in on the trial at the moment that's going on, and we are awaiting these verdicts. What do you make of the trial so far? Is it what you were expecting? You've covered trials in Brazil in the past. Is this different?
Well, this is a very polarized trial, but we need to put that into context. I mean, if you look at the Brazilian history, we had 9 coups d'etats, and in very decisive moments. Start of the Republic, and in '64 as well. So, I mean, and this changed a lot of the Brazilian history. And something that we learned is that if you don't punish who tried the coup d'etat, later, even if they haven't succeeded at that moment, they will succeed because they got the know-how. So what Brazilians are doing right now is like trying to, for the first time, put them into trial. It's not only Bolsonaro that's sitting on trial. We have a lot of like high-ranking military there as well. And so this is giving this historical perspective, I think, is very important, even in a heated subject. There's little doubt that Bolsonaro will be found guilty, also because of many reasons. One of them is because of the amount of evidence that they found, very detailed evidence during the investigation. So there's very little doubt about that. The question is, how heavy will the sentence be?
Yeah, thank you very much. you were meant to. It's my fault. I jumped the gun, but we've also got Cherry Chan.
No,
of course,
I was talking a lot, and so let's go to Cherry.
We like to hear you talking.
Cherry will be watching all of your comments in the chat, so please keep your comments coming.
And I also have a poll for everyone,
which
right?
you're going to hold on for 1 second.
Okay, I will hold on for 1 second.
Well, I just want to say who else is coming up, because it's great that we've got Albert, but we've also got two other really good and interesting guests coming up, one who is in Brazil and one who's actually in the US. So we have, I'm really apologise for my pronunciations here. Albert has been trying to help me with this, but Dr. Vinicius G. Carvalho from King's College London. So he's normally in London, but he is currently in Brazil. He'll be joining us from Rio de Janeiro. And a little bit later, we're going to be speaking to a political scientist, Professor Oliver de la Costa Stoichel, who will be discussing, among other things, Trump and also what the future for Brazil will look like. So do stay with us, stick with us, because it will be a really interesting discussion.
And just remember, if you have questions for our guests, please put them in the chat and we will ask them as we can fit them into the conversation.
So you can now tell us your poll.
And now we're asking you. I have this poll question for you today. What would a guilty verdict for Bolsonaro mean for Brazil? There are 4 options. Saves democracy, stops future coups. The second one, holds leaders to account. The third one, precedent for political persecution. And the last one, I have to look for it because it's not on my screen. Yeah, the last one is nothing. So let us know what you think, and I will let you know the result of the poll later.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Cherry. Yeah, and do please put all your comments and questions in the chat because, as I said, we do have some really good guests. First one then, Albert. You just told us about this trial and how it's different, and that you do think that Bolsonaro is likely to be found guilty. But let's just take a step back then to explain why we are where we are. He lost the election in 2022. What happened next?
Actually, it started even before, because there was this moment before the election that he was already putting into question a lot of the electoral process of Brazil, which works actually all on with machines. So, and they wanted a lot of to have it back on paper.
So you mean, so they were like electronic voting machines,
yeah, exactly.
And they wanted to make it back on, as in you vote on a piece of paper.
Exactly,
yeah.
Or mixing both technologies. And so this was a huge topic, and he was already shouting fraud even before the election started. So there was this feeling after what we saw what happened in the Capitol attack, that they would try something similar in Brazil. So he was already undermining the democratic institutions. He was already like in a really like big fight with the Supreme Court, saying that he wouldn't even obey and follow the orders of the Supreme Court, being, I mean, one of these polarizing figures already, Alexandre de Moraes. And Alexandre de Moraes had already some investigations against Bolsonaro. So this was actually
and he's
before.
a Supreme Court justice, and he happens to be the one who's been overseeing this particular trial as well.
Exactly. I mean, Alexandre de Moraes became like the anti-Bolsonaro figure because he was actually concentrating all the processes against Bolsonaro. And then when the election already happened, and during all this discussion and this debate, then Bolsonaro lost the election by a very thin majority, right? Lula won by very, very close, let's say this way. And then you have a moment that Bolsonaro was simply like, didn't speak, didn't say anything. And everybody was wondering what would happen. You had Bolsonaro supporters in front of military barracks, like asking for them to intervene, to put the army, because they didn't want Lula back, the Bolsonaro supporters. So there was this really tense moment. And you even had terrorist attacks of like people trying to explode trucks with gasoline, or even like destroying a police building during when Lula received the diplomation of Lula. Exactly on this day, there was this
That was
situation.
at the beginning of January, do you mean?
That was already in December.
That was in December,
before.
right.
So there was this really tense moment, and no one knew what was happening. And now, after all this investigation, there is kind of like clear that they had a lot of options on the table, and Bolsonaro was really considering a coup d'etat, but the question was how. And there was...
And can you say that, as a matter of fact, that he definitely was considering a coup d'etat when we're still waiting for this final verdict?
He said himself that actually it was brought to the table, but then, in his words, they discarded because it was not feasible. It was not. Not right now. I'm trying to pick up the words, but it was not something that he would follow.
Yeah,
But he said that it was brought to the table. But actually, because there was no way of denying that, they found even projects of projects of law about what they would bring into force.
Yeah.
They found even a plan to assassinate Lula, the president, the elected president, the vice president, Geraldo Alckmin, and Alexandre de Moraes, the judge who was prosecuting him. Yeah. So there was this very detailed, and it was even printed inside the presidential office.
Wow.
So the presidential building, and then it was brought to other people to be discussed. So they have this amount of details about, because everything that's printed in the system gets there, and then when they started the investigation, they could see all this puzzle and understand what was going on. And then Bolsonaro flew to Florida, and there was this storm of January 8th, not 6th, but 8th. This story has many similarities.
We've got some pictures of that here. This is the Congress building, isn't it, where his supporters turned up and stormed, as you said. And that was a real moment, wasn't it, for Brazil and for the authorities?
There was. And there was this moment of creating tension so that the military would go to the streets and intervene. But right now, there are many things, and the international pressure played a huge role there, and that's also important to say. Back then, Joe Biden was the U.S. president, and the Pentagon said that there was no military agreement with Brazil without democracy. So that played a huge role of to make the military think twice about going to a coup d'etat or not. They did that even before the election took place. And also there was this huge movement of acknowledging the result of the election really quick. The US and Europe did that in order to try to avoid any attempts or anything that could go further. It could escalate, or if Bolsonaro wouldn't acknowledge the defeat.
We've just got a comment here from one of our users, Nilay Chaturvedi, and talking about this alleged coup that Bolsonaro is accused of plotting. He said, this user says, Bolsonaro isn't just guilty of plotting a coup of stifling Brazilian democracy, but a ritualized performance of authoritarian nostalgia and a desire to return Brazil to a mythic past. So we were chatting a little bit before we started kind of about this perhaps mythic past of what life was like under a military dictatorship, or why that would be better. What messaging did Bolsonaro have about where he wanted the country to go, and he was the person to do it?
Well, there was this moment, like in the years of the Labour Party, that there was a lot of corruption scandals, and the army appeared a little bit as an institution that is actually not corrupt, that could help. And Bolsonaro is a former military that actually had a record that was not like inside the military there were many doubts about Bolsonaro, and he was kind of expelled from the army. There was a lot of problems inside, but he had the support of the army at that time. And there was a little bit this nostalgia, and there were like many people on the streets shouting to have back the military coup d'etat, or because the military years were better. You have many people still in Brazil that think this way, and these are mostly Bolsonaro supporters, of course.
So just fast forwarding a bit to what happened, we've just seen the storming of the Congress buildings and also the presidential building as well, and there was a Supreme Court as well. What happened next then? At what point was Bolsonaro arrested, and this trial, this huge trial that we have been watching, which we know began quite recently, but when did that all start? Because we're talking with those pictures back in January 2023, we're now in September 2025, so there's quite a bit of time in between.
Exactly. There was the Bolsonaro supporters always say that there is a dictatorship of the Supreme Court, so that they are persecuting Bolsonaro in a political persecution, and that's not fair. So there is this feeling of, and the Supreme Court tried to do that really smoothly and in a very lightly paced process, because you don't want to have this feeling. And that's one of the things. I mean, there is a whole political discussion about if this is a fair trial or not. And especially because Alexandre de Moraes, this judge, I mean, he concentrated a lot of power while doing this. Especially because, I mean, the Supreme Court felt, I mean, the Supreme Court is the guardian of the Brazilian Constitution, and they felt themselves threatened, and also the Brazilian Constitution was threatened. So they felt that they needed to step up to this.
Because the Brazilian Constitution is quite new, isn't it? It's only from the 80s.
Exactly, 88.
Yeah. 88, but very long and very detailed, is my understanding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like it was the dictatorship after our dictatorship, and it was exactly the moment that we were like giving rights to indigenous people. They call it the citizen constitution. So it's a constitution that usually gives limits a lot the power of military authorities and sort of things. So, and Bolsonaro arrives wanting sometimes to really in a road of collision with this constitution and with the Supreme Court, of course. And then the Supreme Court really had this power of they gained a lot of power in this discussion, trying to protect the Brazilian Constitution. Some people say that they went too far by doing this, and that's one of the things. But the amount of evidence that they gathered is really hard to say otherwise, to say that this attempt of coup d'état didn't happen. The thing is, how fair is this trial? If the judges were also victims of it.
Yeah.
Because Bolsonaro himself were trying to overthrow some of them.
Yes.
And so it's like, how can it be a fair trial somehow?
Yeah.
And I think another optic is who appointed them. I mean, looking at the 11 that are on the bench, only 2 of them were appointed by Bolsonaro. And of the 5 that are judging Bolsonaro, I don't think any of them were appointed by him.
No,
so,
none of them.
We can actually hear from 2 of the justices who were speaking just this week when they voted, or with their verdict said that they had found Bolsonaro and others guilty in this. Let's just listen to that. We have Justice Moraes, as we have just been talking about him. We saw pictures of him earlier. And we have Justice Gino with the J.
Flavio Gino. Yeah.
Flavio Gino. So let's just listen to what they had to say.
There was an attempt to abolish the democratic rule of law, an attempted coup, and the existence of a criminal organization.
This is not tyranny, this is not dictatorship. On the contrary, it's the affirmation of the democracy that Brazil has built upon since the 1988 Constitution, and that is how I vote.
So just there to pick up on Justice Gino, and when he's saying this is not tyranny, this is not dictatorship, that's him responding to these accusations that what the Supreme Court has been doing with this trial is tyranny, is dictatorship. And he's saying, no, it's not. What we're doing is trying to protect democracy in Brazil. What did you make of what they said and what you've seen from the trial so far this week?
Well, everybody was waiting for what Moraes would say, and I mean, it's there was this moment of the defense of Bolsonaro that everybody was expecting how Bolsonaro would play along, and actually, I mean, it was quite a. Actually, I mean, it was quite a funny moment that there was a moment that Bolsonaro said, well, I'm planning to run again for president. Do you want to be my vice president? And he asked Moraes. So, like, joking with him. So there was this moment of like, so that was very important for I think, for Moraes and for the Supreme Court to have this idea that this is a fair trial, that he's having the possibility to defend himself. But right now, what you have in Brazil is a movement that's happening not in the Supreme Court, but across the road. We have a square that we call the Three Powers Square. So it's like all the powers
Brasilia
are really in Brasilia.
Yeah.
So you have, and we have have, just crossing the street, you have the parliament. And in the parliament, there's a huge movement right now for a wide amnesty for everybody who stormed the public buildings in the 8th of January, and also for Bolsonaro. So
as in to clear them, to just say, forget it.
Forget it.
Pardon them, like happened in the United States with another similarity.
Exactly. Yeah. And we have a tradition of amnesty back in the dictatorship. In our dictatorship, there was a moment that the dictators themselves and the political system said, okay, we will forget about it. So there was a lot of political persecution back then. So they kind of like pardoned themselves. The military people pardoned themselves and said that they would also look away for what they call terrorists, but like the political opponents back then did. That was also a rough time that we had guerrilla warfare going on in Brazil. So there was this idea of like an amnesty so everybody could come back and build the country again at the very end of the dictatorship. So when we talk about amnesty in Brazil, you have that at the back of your head. And that's the sort of thing that many people don't want right now. And at the same time, on the other side of the spectrum, the political spectrum, that's exactly what they want. I mean, it's exactly what usually people that praise the military coup d'etat of '64, the military people in Brazil, they want the amnesty right now.
Yeah, and we can talk a little bit about that, about what happens with the verdict and what goes next a little bit later. For those of you, should I say, who are joining us, we are talking today about Brazil. We're talking about a trial of the former President Jair Bolsonaro. We are expecting a final verdict this week, and we've already had 2 Supreme Court judges who have said that they have found him guilty, but there are 5 Supreme Court justices who are overseeing this, so they need there to be 3 justices who find him guilty before they can say that that is a conviction for Bolsonaro. We are waiting for one of our first guests to join us. He's a little bit delayed at the moment, so just while we're waiting, we have got, we heard it a bit earlier, but we've got a clip or a bit of something that Bolsonaro said back in July, which we will just play again just to get your reaction to it. But just to make it clear, at the moment, he has not been allowed to speak on social media and in public. Is that right? The Supreme Court again ruled that. Can you just explain what happened there?
Exactly. The Supreme Court understood that Bolsonaro was kind of like playing putting the audience against the Supreme Court and with hate speech and with this sort of things. And this was a very controversial movement because many people said that, I mean, when you really limit the political right of someone to express their positions, you need to have an extreme situation, and many people understand that that was not the case. And then this image that we have in Bolsonaro, that's in the parliament, and that he shows his ankle, and he says that he's humiliated because he needs to have a device in his ankle that shows where he is so that he doesn't escape. There's a huge fear, and there is a lot of surveillance in his house so that he doesn't escape to the American embassy right now.
Or to the Hungarian, where he spent some time at as well.
Indeed.
And others. So we have now got our guest, and let me just bring him in, and then we will play this bit of interview from Bolsonaro. But let's first of all welcome Dr. Vinicius G. Carvevori. I've really been trying to pronounce that, and I know I've got it wrong, but I know you'll forgive me because you are a reader in Brazilian and Latin American studies at King's College in London, which means that you hopefully have lots of sympathy for those of us who aren't very good at our Portuguese. But you are currently in Brazil, so it's really great to hear from you, and you're joining us from Rio de Janeiro, so we really appreciate your time. Just say your name so that I can properly hear it, and everybody who's following along can as well.
Thanks a lot for having me with you. My name is Vinicius de Carvalho. It's not a common name, I know, in England, but it's okay. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here to share some ideas and inputs and insights from Brazil.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. And we were just about to listen to a bit of interview from Bolsonaro from back in July, and we were just hearing from Albert Steinberger, who is our reporter here. He's with the DW Brazil department, and he was just explaining that the Supreme Court has been tough on Bolsonaro in making sure that he wasn't speaking too much publicly, and certainly on social media. Before we listen to Bolsonaro, I'd just like to get a bit of an idea of what the mood is like in Brazil with this court case going on, and whether you feel that it is dividing the country.
Well, the situation is almost a continuation of what happened in the election. The country is very divided between the supporters of Bolsonaro and the opposition to Bolsonaro, let's put it like that. In the last 7th of September, the Independence Day here in Brazil, there were some protests in São Paulo, people asking for the amnesty for these crimes, and that's basically an assumption that crimes have been committed if you are asking for amnesty for them. And it's still quite tense, this division in Brazil. I would say that this is not aggressive in the sense that it's not like we saw just after the election of Lula. It's not like this January of the first month of the president, with what happened in the attacks of the Congress that drove to this trial as well. But still, the country is very polarized between those who are supporters of Bolsonaro and don't see that he committed any crime, and of course the current people in power that really are defending the condemnation of Bolsonaro, and the other people involved on that, many ministers, and among them some generals.
Yeah. Well, let's just hear now from Bolsonaro, who was speaking on July the 25th, and where he is stressing that he is an innocent man. Let's have a listen.
I am an innocent person. What they are doing to the former president of the republic is cowardly. We are going to face everyone. What matters to me is the law of God.
So, Vinicius, what do you make of that rhetoric that was coming out of Bolsonaro there, particularly referring to God and saying that, you know, that's the only person that he will answer to?
So from the beginning of his electoral campaign, Bolsonaro was quite attached for some religious groups in Brazil, evangelical in particular, putting himself basically as a messiah. And curiously speaking, his name is Jair Messias Bolsonaro. And many of these religious groups were part of his government as ministers, leaders and pastors of those movements. And among those groups, there is a huge support for Bolsonaro. And then he's anchoring his defense a lot in this religious perspective, putting himself as someone that is chosen by God to lead the country, and he's the person who should be in charge, and consequently claiming for God is a way that will touch a lot this population that's also evangelical and believers.
And you've got something that you can show talking about the evangelical side and the religious side of this.
Yeah, one thing that really struck me, I've brought up on my laptop, this is a picture, I believe, from 2018, before Bolsonaro was president, but he made a trip to Israel, and he, although he's Catholic, got baptized by a congressman and evangelical pastor in the River Jordan. So, yeah, this kind of religiosity seems to be a big part of his public image, and I'd be interested in what messages I've heard some blunt talk from him that's kind of couched in religious terms, really appeals to this religious base that he's trying to get to vote for him.
Yeah. So religious landscape in Brazil is very complex and defined a lot by one word that we call syncretism. It's a mixture of different beliefs and not sometimes without sense, completely chaotic. So the fact that he is a Catholic person and was baptized there in Jordan by an evangelical pastor, and then back there's quite a lot of images of him going to Catholic masses and take communion as well. So this is quite common and it's also a political game because evangelical communities in Brazil are growing systematically since the 80s. Brazil is not anymore that majority Catholic country that we had 30 years ago. So those evangelical groups, they represent a strong part of the electorate as well. Many of those groups are politically organized and engaged with political parties, some of them defining quite clearly this evangelical identity, and also with another form of syncretism, with a sort of a Judaism reinterpreted in terms of messianic behavior. So you see many of those evangelical churches, people with Israeli flags, some of them dressing even like Jews in their religious acts, but they are evangelical pastors, but putting kippas and talits as they were Jews, rabbis. So this mixture, this syncretism, makes that it's very easy for the politicians to speak to a broader audience and to get the sympathization of them. I will be not surprised that in a while, Bolsonaro and other politicians will move to other religious expressions if those became politically important in the country as well.
And let me just bring in Albert here as well, because obviously we're talking about Bolsonaro's religious support, but generally his support in Brazil. We've seen protests, we saw them, we can probably show some pictures from Independence Day on Sunday where his supporters again came out for him. But is he still as popular as he was?
Well, his popularity is melting a little bit, but he's really strong. He's still really strong and still able to bring a lot of people on the streets to support him, even under such circumstances, even after such evidence is being provided. So this is quite... he has a lot of political power still, and to make this, I mean, in the 7th of September, for example, who organized this protest in the Avenida Paulista in São Paulo was actually an evangelist, Silas Malafaia. So you have a lot of this religious movement plays a huge role. And plays a huge role on this, and you have everybody's looking for next year's election, and one of the persons who is actually could be nominated is actually his wife, who is actually an evangelist. So he's a Catholic married with an evangelist, and when they were presidents, she was, I think, having people praying at the official, our so-called White House, or Palácio da Alvorada. They were having people there praying and for support of God's support and sort of stuff. So you have a lot of this narrative. This plays a huge role for Brazilian election.
Can I just do a quick follow-up? So, you know, at the end of his quote, he said, "I obey the law of God." Is there a sense that this religious law might be higher than the law of the state? And is that in any way eroding democracy or threaten to eroding democracy in Brazil?
I have the feeling that Bolsonaro also, I mean, if you look at him, he's quite an opportunistic politician. So by his history, you could say that. So I think he used a little bit and played for his audience with his words. I mean, even if I'm condemned, I mean, God will absolve me. So.
Vinicius, if I can just bring you back in. We've talked then about his support, his religious support. Who else is still loyal to Bolsonaro?
So what is very curious to see here, and I will come back what Albert just said, because I think it's important to connect here. There is still a huge support in the streets for Bolsonaro, among also many people in the military, even that military has been important names of the military, high ranks of officers and generals are in trial as well, but still has a lot of support among these people. But the important aspect that I would like to connect here is this sense that there are a lot of political parties that used to support Bolsonaro, what we call in Brazil centrão, the big center parties, those who are not left or right, those that are very...
Oops. Oh, I think we have lost Vinicius, or he's frozen anyway for now. But let's live stream, yes. Let's just pick up on what he was just saying, that he's lost support actually within some of those political parties.
Yeah, and I mean, he mentioned a very important institution almost in the Brazilian politics, which is this centrão, this big center. These are parties. I mean, Brazil, it's a presidential country, but actually we need a lot, and the parliament has a lot of power. So without the parliament, all the presidents that didn't have the power, they end up impeached or had an issue and didn't finish their mandate. So having the parliament is very important, and Centrão is the way you have to have the parliament, because they form a majority that they could go for either side depending on which political party you are. So Lula, and usually you can rent them, but you cannot buy them for sure. They are really volatile according to the public opinion and this sort of stuff. But there are a lot of these parties who are actually connected to churches. Yeah. And yeah, the churches are play a big role in the Brazilian political system right now.
And just talking about, the loyalty for him and the support for him, is it for him, or is it disaffection with the alternative, which is the current president, Lula? Is it disaffection with that? Is it frustration about the whole way the politics is working in Brazil? Is it even bigger than that?
Well, I think right now, I mean, you mean about the political situation
the fact that Bolsonaro is still courting this amount of support. Is it him, or is it disaffection with institutions, President Lula, the economy, whatever?
You have a lot of people who don't want to vote for Lula again, and who see this really as a corrupt party. So there is this anti-Lula figure.
Because he's on the left.
Who is on the left, Lula is on the left, and Bolsonaro is on the far right. So you have this, he's the personification of the anti-Lula. But you have right now a political movement going on about who is going to be the candidate of the right parties and far right parties, and there is this whole discussion about who is going to be this figure who can defeat Lula. So Lula is the person to be defeated, and Bolsonaro cannot be elected. I mean, because of another trial of the electoral tribunal considered him guilty about misusing the power of president. So that's why he cannot run for president. And then you have a lot of people trying to run and to get his voters and inherit his voters. Yeah. And the governor, São Paulo's governor, is the big name right now.
Yes, and we'll talk about him in a moment, so just hold that thought, because that is very interesting. As you will know, we were just talking to Dr. Vinicius G. Carvalho, I think I said that better this time, from King's College London, but unfortunately we lost the line, but apparently he is now back, just as I was saying that. So thank you for coming back. Sorry that we lost you there. I just sort of one final question before we let you go. I was just speaking to Albert about frustrations generally with, is the support for Bolsonaro himself, or is it frustrations with Lula, with institutions, with the way Brazil is currently being governed? What's your take on that?
So I think not only in Brazil, but in many parts of the world, we are living a very strong democratic crisis, or a crisis of democracy, more generally speaking. I think we need to rethink very much how societies are feeling represented. We are seeing a pressure for quick change and for immediate response for needs of societies. And Brazil is not far from the other parts of the world where we are seeing this. If we look today in France, it's a good example of that. So I think this crisis of democracy is affecting a lot Brazil, a country that is known by inequalities that historically haven't overcome, inequalities that are reflecting in education, in healthcare, and access to goods and services in the society. So there is this pressure. Both candidates here, or both politicians that we are talking here, they have been experienced the power, and they didn't return everything that was expected from them. So this sort of polarization came a lot from that. We came after a dictatorship with a large process of redemocratization, people learning what that means. We had right-wing governments, we had left-wing governments, we have extreme right governments. So population is looking at that. Electors are looking at that and say where it's coming, the ones or the one that will support a change for us. And another important aspect to mention is it's a country that's based on a share of power. So people vote in Brazil very much to the leader, to the president. Most of people even don't remember who they vote for MPs in the last election. And that's very serious for democracy again, because it's there in the parliament where laws are made, where part of the conducting of the country is decided. So people tend to not focus on the parliament and focus so much in this figure of the president, where they expect that will solve and sort out the problems of the population, sort of a dictatorial memories or a lack of understanding of how democracy works. And even this crisis, let's say, that we are living now with a lot of pressure over the judiciary, it's a lack of understanding of the balance of powers. So people say, no, the judiciary is running the country. Well, it's not running the country. It's part of the process of running a country. We need to have this independence of powers. So I think that's a big problem for a country, that it's still building up a sense of what's democracy.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for coming back as well after we lost you. We really appreciate it. We will let you go now, but thank you very much for those comments and for those insights. Thanks. Thank you. And we have got now somebody else who is joining us. This is Professor Oliver de la Costa Stoenkel, who is a political scientist. He is from Brazil, where he is professor at FGV in Sao Paulo, but he's currently in the United States, where he's a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment in Washington and a fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. So thank you very much for joining us and for hopefully enlightening us as we have this discussion about what is going on, not just with Bolsonaro, but throwing it forward a bit as to what will happen generally in Brazil. I do just want to talk a little bit about Bolsonaro's Trump support, particularly as you are in the United States, so you seem very well placed for that. We have heard from Trump. We know that he has supported Bolsonaro. You've got a Truth Social post, Michelle.
I'm going to get there. It's going to take me a minute.
It's going to take, so we'll bring that up in a moment. But I'd just like to get your views, Oliver, just on what the parallels perhaps are from the United States and Brazil and the way things are being played out.
Sure, Alex, thank you. First of all, pleasure to be part of the discussion, Michelle and Albert. I think that there are numerous uncanny similarities between U.S. politics and Brazilian politics. We've seen over the past 10 years the rise of a populist right. We've seen so many similarities vis-a-vis Trump and Bolsonaro. For example, the fact that they preemptively sought to undermine public trust in the electoral system. They both failed to win re-election. They both failed to concede. And their followers in both countries, with a 2-year difference, ended up violently storming government buildings. We had January 6, 2021 here in the United States. And 2 years and 2 days later, we had a strikingly similar development in Brazil. And that, of course, has put a lot of pressure on democracies in both countries. And I think when Trump looks at Bolsonaro, he sees himself to some extent. Now, there's, of course, numerous differences here. Bolsonaro is part of a long history of Brazilian military figures that consider themselves to be more patriotic than the civilians and more stable. And sort of, I think there is still a sense in Brazil that the military, when the civilians mess up, they can sort of step in. It's like a wayward child that you want to, prepare to govern, but occasionally it makes mistakes. So in that case, you need to step in. That's, of course, not at all existent in the United States. But I think what Trump is really concerned about is the precedent that holding a former president to account who sought to undermine the democratic order, that is a precedent that if it succeeds in Brazil, which would be extraordinary considering Brazil's long history of impunity vis-a-vis those who sought to attack the democratic order. If that works, then you do have lots of people potentially in the United States asking, well, what are the mistakes that we've made, because we've also dealt with somebody who sought to undermine democracy, and we haven't actually solved it well. So I think that explains in part why Trump does pay a lot of attention to what's going on in Brazil, and why, and that's quite likely, I would say, Bolsonaro is convicted later this week, I expect Trump to impose further sanctions against justices, and the bilateral relationship to suffer even more.
Yeah. And of course, Trump himself has described Bolsonaro as Trump of the tropics. We've got that Truth Social post now, haven't we?
We do. Right.
So you just talk us through that, and you've highlighted some of the important parts there.
So yeah, Trump truthed this out on his Truth Social back in July, and he was looking at some of the parallels that he sees between himself and Jair Bolsonaro. This is nothing more or less, Trump says, than an attack on a political opponent, something I know much about. It happened to me times 10, and now our country is the hottest in the world. I don't know what he means by that, but the great people of Brazil will not stand for what they are doing to their former president. I'll be watching the witch hunt of Jair Bolsonaro, his family, and thousands of his supporters.
So that word witch hunt in particular stands out, doesn't it?
Yeah. I just also want to read out a comment from one of our viewers here. Stanley Kubrick, the Stanley Kubrick, also talking about these parallels between Trump and Bolsonaro. He says, Bolsonaro was a paratrooper, Trump a TV personality. These mega egos fit well into fascist tendencies. If the West isn't more vigilant about their democracies, we will lose them, a reoccurring pattern. It brings to a question, how does the public in Brazil view Trump as a threat to their democracy or as a supporter of their democracy?
Oliver, perhaps you could answer that.
Well, that, of course, depends on whom you ask. We've just had on Brazilian Independence Day, on September 7th, a massive pro-Bolsonaro rally, and they unfurled a large U.S. flag. And when asked about this, Eduardo Bolsonaro, Jair's son, himself a powerful politician with potential presidential ambitions in the future, said that this is to thank America, this is to thank Trump for supporting us in our cause. So from a pro-Bolsonaro perspective, this is of course seen as positive. Now, for those more skeptical of Bolsonaro's strategy and those who actually support his conviction, this is seen as undue interference. This is seen as autocracy promotion. And it's really quite, unprecedented. This is part of a complete change of how the United States relates to democracy abroad. We've seen Trump actively supporting leaders with authoritarian ambitions, be it in El Salvador, Hungary. We've seen him very reluctant criticizing abuse in Turkey and Russia, in many other countries. So it certainly fans the flames of polarization in Brazil. And it's, of course, for those particularly who are not with Bolsonaro, it evokes memories of a long history of U.S. interference in Brazil. Now, there's a very interesting element to this, which is when Bolsonaro sought re-election and sought to undermine public trust in the electoral system and pressured the generals to support him in a coup, and there's lots of evidence for that. The Biden administration was really crucial, pressuring Brazilian military to accept the result. So I think that adds another personal layer for Trump to sort of say that, because he faced Biden, he lost against Biden. And then on top of that, it was the Biden administration which guaranteed that the Brazilian generals would not go along in 2022 with, Bolsonaro, who was willing to illegally remain in power.
Yeah. Albert, that's what you were saying a little bit earlier as well. Did you want to just respond to that?
Yes, I think it's quite interesting as well that, the popularity of Lula was in a free fall before that. And then when when Eduardo goes and then make all this.
So Eduardo is Bolsonaro's son, who, when you say goes, went to Florida.
He
just
went to Florida, exactly.
Remind everyone.
Exactly. He went to Florida and he does a lot of lobbying for Trump to impose the tariffs. And then when that happened, actually, Lula starts having a rise in the popularity again. And then the Congress was completely against Lula, turned a little bit. So there is a movement that this tariffs of Trump imposed, that they kind of like changed a bit, like the landscape that things were going in such a level that even Bolsonaro, the father, said to the son that said, "Oh, he's still inexperienced. He needs to, he's learning." So there was a little bit of a divise moment in the right scene.
And let's just remind people what did happen. So, Oliver, you could just fill in the gaps here. But Trump, after Eduardo had been lobbying and he'd been seeing what was happening to Bolsonaro, he slapped on these 50% tariffs on some of Brazil's exports, sanctioned the Supreme Court Justice Moraes, who we were talking about a little bit earlier. And there were other sanctions as well. So pretty strong from Trump and from his administration.
Absolutely, and this is the worst this is the worst crisis in Brazil-U.S. relations since 1964, when the United States supported a military coup. So since democratization, and this is without precedent, this is the United States using tools, financial coercion tools of sanctions against the justice of a democracy, which are usually reserved for people who commit war crimes. And you know, I mean, this is a complete, this is a weaponization of tools to actually defend democracy. And I completely agree with Albert. I think that there's a rally around the flag effect, which is predictable, right? I mean, you have somebody who blatantly intervenes in a highly sensitive domestic situation in a completely partisan way. I mean, and the majority of Brazilians does think Bolsonaro is guilty. So, you know, polls suggest that. So doing that, I think, is bad news for the bilateral relationship. It's bad news for so many people who have for years and years sought to build mutual confidence. And despite this history of U.S. interference that I've alluded to over the past decades. And I think the relationship has improved markedly over many, many years. So this is something which I feel damages ties. We've seen that recent polls also show that the number of Brazilians who view the United States favorably has declined dramatically. And, you know, I think that the country that most benefits from all this will be, you know, above all, China and other major blocks of power who will be keen to strengthen their ties in Brazil, as Brazil will hedge, will diversify, and will be more cautious vis-a-vis the United States. So I completely agree. It basically was good news, quote unquote, for Lula politically. For Lula, yes, because he will utilize that as we go towards the elections to say, I defend Brazil and the opposition defends U.S. interests.
And let's listen to President Lula now, who was speaking just last week on this so-called foreign interference. He doesn't, in this particular soundbite, mention the United States, but I think it's pretty clear. So if we could just play that, and great to get your reaction, Oliver.
We are not, and we will not be, a colony of anyone again. We are capable of governing and taking care of our land and our people without interference from any foreign government. We maintain friendly relations with all countries, but we do not accept orders from anyone.
So we will not accept orders from anyone. As you said, this has actually worked out quite well for Lula. Do you think that he will be able to use that support going forward and looking ahead to the election in Brazil next year?
Yeah, well, there's two trends here. The first is from a rhetorical point of view, political point of view. This will be absolutely the theme of the Lula campaign. Now, the problem is, of course, that the relationship between the United States and Brazil is in coma. It will not recover anytime soon. The only hope Brazil may have is that American buyers of Brazilian goods in the United States will pressure the U.S. government to, add a couple of exceptions and exemptions. Coffee, for example, the prices of coffee will go up. The United States doesn't grow coffee, so this is just really bad for the consumer. And the Trump administration needs to think about the midterms also next year. So unless the economy improves, the Democratic Party will win the midterms. So that's the only hope. Now, from beyond that, I think this will probably not improve, and Lula will seek to use the images that we've seen of Bolsonaro supporters not only waving Brazilian flags but also waving American flags, and frame them as kind of defending U.S. interests above all, or inviting a foreign power to intervene in a domestic political process for personal reasons, right? That basically to say that Eduardo Bolsonaro came to the United States in order to lobby on his father's behalf, not on Brazil's behalf. And I would suspect this to work quite well. Actually, I think that the probability of Lula winning re-election last year is higher today than it was prior to July 9th when Trump sent this letter.
Did you want to pick up on that?
And that's also interesting because, I mean, yesterday, Moraes also said, the Justice Moraes said that Brazil will not be a colony. He mentioned actually the moment that Bolsonaro did a meeting with ambassadors, and he said that there was a kind of Brazilian word, entreguismo, so that he was delivering the country for foreign nations. And then he said that Brazil will not be what he wanted, to be a colony again, this time not from Portugal. It doesn't say the United States, but it's quite clear. So this narrative is picking up also inside the courts, and I found that quite interesting.
Yeah. That kind of ties in with a comment that
sorry.
No, go ahead. And then there's a comment I'd like to read from one of our viewers, but you go ahead.
No, to what Albert said, I think, if I had to advise the Trump administration, I said, if you genuinely want to help Bolsonaro, this is not the way to do it. You're undermining his cause, because if there was a judge who was actually seeking to reduce or was opposed to the conviction, I mean, the political space to do that now is much smaller, because whatever you do now, the chances are that people will believe that you've given into U.S. pressure. So I think it was highly counterproductive. I think that actually the Trump pressure made it less likely for the Supreme Court to lower for example, the amount of years that Bolsonaro will have to spend in prison, because it's become politically more difficult. So, and I think we've seen that in other countries where the sort of MAGA candidate in Canada and Australia was about to win the election, and then Trump intervened in both countries, and then sort of the opponents ended up winning. So this is, is quite incredible. And I think this also shows that Eduardo Bolsonaro misjudged, at least for now, the impact that the Trump interference would have, because it certainly, for now at least, hasn't helped his father. Now, there's just one element which we must take into consideration. The U.S. tariffs obviously will have a negative impact on Brazil's economy. And the big question is how much the nationalist fervor that Lula will obviously fan prior to the elections can compensate for some economic damage that will take place, and voters also look at their wallets when casting their votes.
Yeah. So if you're not part of the wider MAGA sphere and you want to do well politically, let Trump talk, but then you need kind of another plan to deal with the tariffs coming, and that ties into what one of our great viewers who comes back and watches this every week, Nilay Chaturvedi, he has a question, and this kind of goes to the wider picture again. Does this again bring to the fore the blatant intervention U.S. subjects Latin American countries to? What's the path forward for Latin American democracies who don't want to become U.S. vassals or almost political colonialism sites for that? So what would you say? What is the path forward for Latin American democracies who don't want to be under the U.S.'s thumb?
So I think that Latin America nowadays, particularly South America, is much less exposed to U.S. influence than at any point during the 20th century. And this really changed dramatically over the past 25 years. And I think this is sometimes underappreciated elsewhere, or fully appreciated elsewhere, is that in 2000, the year 2000, Brazil-China ties were incipient, not relevant. Nowadays, Brazil exports more to China than to Europe and the United States combined. Now, that has raised some concern that Brazil is too much in China's orbit. And I think Brazil's strategy will be autonomy through diversification, which is why a president who has for years opposed free trade agreements is now really a big supporter of ratification of the Mercosur European Union trade deal, which he hopes, and we all hope actually, will be ratified by the end of the year, because the more partners Brazil will have, the better. The more, because it can hedge, it can diversify, it can have more wiggle room. And I think we're seeing that across South America. I think it's different in Central America and in Mexico and in Colombia, actually. Colombia is the only exception in South America. And we did see when Trump pressured President Petro earlier this year, when there was a public spat about the deportation flights, the Colombian government immediately had to accept U.S. demands because it's still too dependent strategically and economically on the United States. That's completely different in the rest of the region. So I think that's actually, that's a useful strategy. I'm not in favor of Brazil being, rigidly aligned with any bloc. I think in particular with Europe, it shares a whole lot when it comes to Europe's and Brazil's views on how the international system should work. Both regions don't want to pick sides between the United States and China, and are in favor of multilateralism and a functioning global governance. I think there's a lot of potential there. I think Latin American countries should also preserve ties to the United States, to China, to others. So I think that will be the strategy. And in general, despite all the difficulties, I'm actually quite optimistic about Brazil's democracy. There'll be lots of trouble ahead. I mean, this is far from over. The Tarcísio, the governor of São Paulo, in my mind, has made a fateful choice to go all in pro Bolsonaro, has said he will fight for an amnesty. So this is still a story we'll have to follow for quite some time. But this is also the first time in 200 years that Brazil is seeking to hold somebody like that accountable. So I think that despite all this outside pressure, the region is very well positioned to consolidate its democracies.
That's very interesting and a positive note to end on. I do have one final question then. If Bolsonaro is found guilty, which at the moment it looks likely that he will be, what do you think will happen immediately? Will he, as you said earlier, will he serve many years in prison, or could there be an amnesty, a pardon on him, do you think?
So for now, I think, yes, he will probably go to prison. I think there will be a movement in Congress for an amnesty. However, the most likely scenario is that this amnesty will not include him, but the thousands of supporters who have participated in the riots of January 8, 2023. Now, Bolsonaro is quite old, so at some point, I think there may be a reduction of the amount of time he'll have to spend in prison. But it's certainly not Bolsonarismo is here to stay. So I think the key, and we've heard that from Albert and Vinicius, is how will Bolsonarismo, what will be the role of Bolsonarismo in Brazilian politics with its founder and leader and figurehead in prison? And so I think we'll have lots of mobilization. I don't think there'll be political violence necessarily, but certainly a big U.S. reaction is quite likely, which is bound to downgrade Brazil-U.S. relations further in the short term.
Fascinating. Thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Before I let you go, I just want to check, Albert, did you have anything that you wanted to say to Oliver with what he said? Because Oliver does need to go fairly soon.
Yes, no, I agree with Oliver. I think that, I mean, the result, I mean, this trial is really a way of consolidating, of making the Brazilian way of like punishing dictatorships. And I mean, we had 9 coups d'etats in our history. I mean, we need to try to make things different and more democratically. So this is, I think, is a way towards it. But at the same time, elections next year, you're going to have a lot of American support for the far-right parties, and they play a heavy ball game in the social media. So I think I will be cautious on saying. I mean, I think I agree with all the analysis, but sometimes elections, and especially on social media, that defines a lot our Congress. They will have a key role, and I think the American support will have a key role on that, the MAGA support.
Thank you. Oliver, let me go. Thank you very much, political scientist Oliver de la Costa Stoenkel. We really appreciate you being with us and look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I just wanted to come back to you because you mentioned him earlier, and so did Oliver. He was talking about the Sao Paulo governor, Freitas. I think that's how I pronounce his surname.
Tarcísio de Freitas?
Yeah.
The governor of São Paulo?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Do you think, because just there Oliver was saying that he thought that he'd overplayed his hand or in supporting Bolsonaro, do you think that he could be the person who will become the figurehead for the Bolsonaris, those who can no longer support their leader because he is in jail, potentially?
I think there is this huge fight, and I think it's interesting to follow that. I mean, you have a lot of people in the Bolsonaro family who wants to be the natural inheritant of Bolsonarism, but you have, Tarcísio de Freitas is the strongest figure, and he has, I mean, all the polls show that. So he is the big name, and this move that Oliver mentioned, I think it was quite a decisive move. He really went all the way to save Bolsonaro, all the way for the amnesty, and he started to use all his power to make this amnesty gain traction in the Congress. But that made him a little bit more to the far right, and he was actually a figure. Many people were saying that actually also in São Paulo that they tend to be a little bit more right, but not so far right. That he kind of burned the bridges that he had built all along in his work as a politician in the last years.
But still somebody that we need to keep an eye on then.
Absolutely.
Keep an eye on that name.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much. Really appreciate you being with us. Anything else from the chat that needs to be added before we go to the poll with Cherry?
I just wanted to tell Carolina Valina, we actually really appreciate your comments. Don't put yourself down. You have really good comments. And actually, you had one that was really good, and maybe we'll get a quick take for you on this one. She's asking, if Bolsonaro is found guilty, are we going to see his supporters go into a revolution, or is it more going to be kind of like something we'll see at the box, not the box office, at the voting box, in a year's time?
Well, he is already in house arrest. Mm-hmm. So I think there is what the Supreme Court is doing is actually they are putting up the pressure and the heat really slowly, mm-hmm. so that you don't have this moment that will ignite a revolution or something like that. Mm-hmm. I mean, many people earlier said that there will be like streets movements, mass movements, but Bolsonaro was arrested, house arrest, and that didn't happen. So I don't think that this kind of movement will be, also because there are still legal measures that you can make. And you have this amnesty movement. I think what we're going to see is really all this political game in Brasilia trying to make this amnesty. And this is the question, if we'll include Bolsonaro or only the 8th of January supporters. That's what we're going to see in the next days and weeks, probably.
Interesting.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Albert. Really, really appreciate you being with us today.
My pleasure.
Can we just talk about the poll? Because I saw that you had put it in the chat.
I did. I closed the poll already. And let me just repeat the poll question in case you forgot. We asked you, what would a guilty verdict for Bolsonaro mean for Brazil? We've got 115 votes. 42% says it means it saves democracy, stops future coups. 33% says it holds leaders to account, 12% said it sets precedent for political persecution, and 11% said it means nothing.
So most people think it is significant then. Thank you very much, Cherry. Thanks to everyone who's joined us for this. I hope that you found it interesting. I certainly have. And it's one to watch now what's going to happen with this verdict. We should find out by the end of the week. And also what will happen in the election, the presidential election next year. So this will not fall from the news, will it, anytime soon, I don't think.
Not at all.
But big thank you to you very much, Albert, for being with us. Thank you to you, Michelle. Thank you to you, Cherry. And thanks very much to all of you in the chat.
Please come back next week. We'll release the question that we'll be talking about 24 hours ahead of our live stream. And we'll see you next week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.